So welcome everyone to our 127th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. It's very good to have Maxence Franceschi presenting, and he will be presenting segmentation on a two-sided market, the case of football intermediaries. Maxence has about an hour to talk in, and then we've got about half an hour that we can use for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand at any point, and it's probably the case that Maxence can't see your hand, so I will then interrupt Maxence, and you can ask away your question. Maxence, please do take away your talk.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, James, for allowing me to present. Thank everyone for being present online and to attend this presentation. I will present to you this ongoing project. It's very work in progress, so I don't know if I have enough to stay for 1 hour on the stage, but anyway, I will have a lot of questions if you don't have, so maybe we will have some stuff to discuss. So this is a project about football intermediaries. And I'm working on that with Ulrich Brandes from ETH Zurich and Jean-François Brocard from Limoges as myself. So basically, I will start by discussing the terms agents and intermediary, because in the past regulation, the term used was intermediary. So it referred to a legal or natural person. So an intermediary could be composed of several persons, several agents, as we said. So it has changed lately. Basically, the regulation is coming into force this year. It started in January, and the last part of the regulation will come into force in October. So now we will talk more about agent, because they have to be licensed, and each one of them will be how do you say, a physical person. So it will be more individualized. However, in this research, we rely on 2022 data. So we will mainly talk about intermediaries, societies of agents. So I will try to say intermediaries, but if you hear me saying agent or agency or anything, it's all the same. I'm talking about groups of agents or agencies in general. After this short introduction with the vocabulary, I will drive you through our research through the theoretical sides. First, I will discuss about the two-sided market, what is it, and why we can consider maybe agents as two-sided market, and how it helped us to determine our research questions and so. So a two-sided market is a market where two groups of agents cohabitate and work are connected through a platform or an intermediary. So the two sides of the market are connected through the platform, and there are some indirect network effect between them, meaning that the participation of one side has an impact on the participation of the other side. So to take an example, for example, it could be a negative indirect network effect when we talk about advertising. If you go on YouTube and there are too much ads on YouTube, then maybe you will go elsewhere. So it's a negative effect. However, it could be a positive effect. For example, on a selling platform like eBay, if there are more people selling, maybe more consumers will be joining the platform. So basically, this is what indirect network effects are. And they are opposed, obviously, to direct network effect, meaning that the participation of agents, economic agents on one side can have an impact on other agents on the same side, for example, on social media. If more people use Instagram or TikTok, then you will be more interested into getting Instagram and TikTok. So how does this apply maybe to our case of football intermediaries? We think that if an intermediary represents more players, then it will be contacted by more clubs. And if clubs, if the intermediary is connected to more clubs, then it will be able to attract more players. So basically, we have here positive indirect network effects. This is an assumption. I do not have any proof or anything. It's a good idea for further research, but it's a bit difficult to measure. So it's just an assumption for now. And regarding the direct network effects, it's a bit more complicated to say. Does more clubs join or contact an agent if he is already well connected to other clubs? Do players join an agency if the agency already represents players from this type? It's difficult to even assume at this stage, but it gives us an idea of the theoretical perspective. So these positive indirect network effects can create a feedback loop. Basically, if you have more connection to clubs, then you will arguably attract more players, which in turn create more transfers and then more connection to clubs. So you can grow bigger in this way. And it should, according to multi-sided market theory, it should lead to one platform cornering or tipping the market. However, there are counter forces, of course. In general theory, there are the case of multi-homing. It means that one economic agent, sorry, can join several platforms. In our case, for example, clubs can be connected, can work with several agents, even if players cannot. So this can create a counter force. There are maybe congestion effects. If, I don't know, if you are a forward age 20 and you want to join a new agency, maybe you want to join an agency that already represents, I don't know, 10 forward your age. So this might create some counter forces against monopoly of a platform, because more platforms are needed to represent all the players here in our case. Also, if there is a big competition between sellers, and it is the case between players, they might want to avoid that competition. It's a bit the same idea that the congestion effect. And also maybe the differentiation between the agencies. I don't know if they have a legal advisor, if they make data analysis or anything. They can be different from other agencies, and then it can avoid too much concentration on the market. So the issue is, if there is too much concentration on the market, too strong market power, then some agents on one or the other side of the market could not be correctly matched, and this could lead to inefficient matching. So this is an important quote in our reflection, and we wanted to broadly talk about the characteristics of competition between intermediaries on the football intermediation market, but it's a bit broad. So in this specific presentation, I will talk more about the different portfolio composition profiles that exist on the market, because we think it's a way for agents to differentiate from other agency and try to be more attractive for players and clubs. On which data do we rely to assess, to try to answer this question? We started with a player sample composed of big 5 players after the 2022 summer transfer window. And the data are from Transfermarkt, Primary, and Footmercato as a secondary sources, cross-checking for agent. So according to Transfermarkt, there were 2,755 players on Big 5 team at the time. So unfortunately, some do not have agents, or we do not have the information. 13 do not have intermediary. Sorry, I will try to use intermediary instead. 13 do not have an intermediary. It's the case, for example, for Kevin De Bruyne. Maybe you have heard about that. So some of them do not have any intermediary. 34 are under 18 years old, so should not theoretically have an agent, even if it's not always the case. At least officially, they do not have one, so we cannot assess it. And finally, we are missing data for 262 players. This leads us to a sample of 2,400 players. We removed 17 because we needed the Transfermarkt valuation information too. And finally, we have a sample of 2,429 players. It's about 88% completion ratio, so pretty decent for agents. So what we know exactly in this data is the link between the players and their clubs, obviously, and their agent, their intermediary. So this is not exactly what we are looking for, so we had to make an assumption. The assumption is that the player is a link between the club and the intermediary. So if an intermediary represents these two players, 1 and 2, he is then connected to the clubs, to their clubs. Maybe he's connected to other clubs, but we cannot know that, so it's a bit difficult to assess. This is, for me, the only assumption that we can do. And obviously, if the player is playing for a club, the intermediary should have the phone number of someone at that club, I guess. So it's an acceptable assumption. Then we had to transform these players' data into intermediaries' data, obviously. And this led us to a sample of 773 intermediaries. So the 2,400 players are represented by almost 800 intermediaries, so about 3 players per intermediary on average. And this gave us a 2-mode social network. I don't know if you're still seeing. I think you can see now. Yeah. Okay. So this is a 2-mode network. So it means that we have different kind of nodes. The dark blue ones are the agents, and the colored ones are different clubs from different leagues. And if I zoom, we can see, for example, I know this agency, Classico, is very well represented in France. They have a lot of players in France, but they have one in Germany, one in Great Britain, and one in Italy. At least they are connected to this club. Maybe they have several players there. Sorry. So this is the social network that we have, and this is the part of the analysis that we want to implement. We want to check the portfolio composition and then see how well the agent are connected to clubs. So how will we do that? The answer is very brief. We will cluster the agent. We used, at this stage, as I said, it's a work in progress. So we checked with hierarchical clustering with word method, and came in because it's the two most usual, at least known method, but we are looking forward to trying other things. But before clustering, we had to, of course, compute the Euclidean distance matrix and normalize the data. After before the normalization, we had to subset the sample. I will go back to that a bit later. And before this subsetting, of course, we had to compute the data that we were interested to achieve the clustering. So the data computation was, the purpose of it was to have decent variable to qualify the portfolio of players. So what are the dimensions of the portfolio that we wanted to consider? The first one was the size of the portfolio. Basically, the number of players was maybe one of the most important variables that came to mind. Then the diversification within the portfolio with regard to position, citizenship, and age. And finally, the valuation of that portfolio with transfer market values. I will go briefly into the diversification and valuation variable to explain a bit more about how we did that. Regarding the diversification, we considered the citizenship, the position, and the age. And we had these frequencies. We could say for an agent, he has 25% of forward, he represents 15% of goalkeepers, and so on. So we had these frequencies. For age, I just split into 5 categories with the same number of players in each category. And then to have one index in our clustering, we computed Hirschman-Erfindal index for each one of these dimensions. Well, briefly, HHI is computed. Normally, it's a competition measure on a market. You will use the market share of each agent acting on the market, and you will see how the market is concentrated or not. In this case, we wanted to see if one agent is concentrated or diversified in terms of citizenship, position, and age. So the SI is the frequency for each category for one intermediary. So basically, we used the percentage of forward, defender, midfielder, and goalkeeper, and computed the HHI, and we then standardized it to have a value that is the same in the three dimension: citizenship, position, and age. And it's going from 0 to 1, 0 meaning that it is more diversified, and 1 meaning that it's more concentrated. Regarding valuation, we took the well-known transfer market values but we computed several kind of metrics to help us in our clustering. So we had three ideas. The first one was to basically use the plain and simple transfer market values. Then we logged them before summarizing and averaging. And the third idea, a bit more long to explain, is to compute a player status. We often talk about the segmentation of the players' market in terms of wages, transfer fees, or here valuation. So we wanted to have like a star player group, a role player group, and other player group, let's say. So at this stage, we just split the total amount of valuation into three groups, and we took each. We classify each player in each group according to its value. So to illustrate, here we have the three groups. So sorry, mid-tier should be in the middle, but so mid-tier, low tier, and top tier. Each of these three categories represent a total valuation of the same amount. But of course, the number of players in each of these categories is different. So in the top tier, there are 6% of the players. In the mid-tier, there are almost 15% of the players, and in the low tier there are 79% of the players. So this helps us split the sample of players and compute then the frequency for each agent. So this is the distribution of transfer market values for the 2,400 players. So this is how we split. So then we had to sample the intermediary data set that we had, because given the variable that we used, it was a bit impossible to use everything. Yes, we had to remove the players that represent less than 3 players. So we only considered in our clustering the intermediaries that represented at least 3 players, so more than 2 players. And this led us to a sample of 204 intermediaries. However, the intermediaries representing 2 players or less is a category on its own. Maybe it's not very interesting to assess their diversification or even their total valuation also, but it's still a big group of intermediaries, and it is interesting to assess. I computed a Lorentz curve just to illustrate the distribution, kind of the inequalities of the number of players and the total transfer market value between the agents. So the top 10% of agents represent 52% of the players, and they represent 72% of the total market value. So yeah, it's a bit concentrated, of course, not as much as capital, for example, but still, it's important. And just for the record, the number of agents that represent only 1 player is 455. So on a sample of 700, it's a lot. And inside that, we have the families, for example. So it's a lot of people that are currently represented by their families, but it will change maybe with the new regulation. Okay, so we have our variables. And we, at the first visualization tool, we used a UMAP. We used a dimension, it's a dimension reduction technique to help us visualize if some clusters can be seen on a 2D perspective. So here I colored by each variable, and we see that already that, for example, for position, we have a very small group of individuals that have a high HHI in terms of position. So this means that this group is very concentrated on a specific position. We don't know yet which one, but they are concentrated. So we also see that it's some a small group here can form a cluster in terms of status. So top tier, status 1 is top tier. And also mid tier, we have a small cluster of intermediaries that have relatively more mid-tier players. So regarding the results, I will present successively three clusterings. One for each of the three valuation variables that we used. So with the plain and simple transfer market valuation, to start with, we do not have a very big elbow here, but we considered 4 groups, and the results were not very interesting. We had 2 very big groups and 2 very small groups. One of them being the number of one of them being the top agencies here, with a lot of highly valued players. Here being agencies that are concentrated in position, for example. So it was not very interesting, and this is why we wanted to check other way of considering the valuation of players. So I go very quickly on this one because I think it's not very interesting at this stage. I will go a bit deeper, obviously, on the last case. The second one is a bit similar. We used the log transfer market values here, and similarly, we considered four groups. I can comment a bit. Sorry, I did not comment here. But how do we select 4 groups? We look at the scree plot. Here we have a small elbow at 4, but it could be at 6 too, maybe. And we use the NB class package on R, which compute a lot of indexes to see what could be the correct way of cutting the clustering here. And we considered 4 here because obviously if we can have fewer clusters, it's more interesting not to have too many clusters, but we checked also 6. It was not very more interesting. So I go a bit quickly here. If you have any question, I will answer them, but honestly, it's not the most interesting part. The issue was a bit the same. The logarithmic transformation of the valuation changed a bit the big agencies group. We have not here 7 agencies, but we have 17. They are a bit more. They are a bit bigger, but it's still not very interesting because we still have 2 very big groups. So we move to a third variable. Here, once again, the scree plot is not very impactful. We hesitated between 6 and 8. I have the data for 6 if you are curious, but I decided to go with 8 for the moment, and I will try to characterize the group from this clustering. As I said, it's a work in progress, so as of now we are at this stage and we have these 8 groups. I'm looking forward to your comments, and maybe we will have other ideas, other way of clustering and so, but I will discuss about these results to show you where we are going and what we try to do and what is our working path with these data. So here we have this hierarchical clustering. So if I can remind you, it has been normalized, it's Euclidean distance, and it's a word method. So we could discuss about that, but this is what we did here. And we have 8 groups that we try to describe. Basically, it's like one group represents one of the variables. So it's not very diverse, but it's interesting, however, because here we have, so the first group is the big agencies. They have a lot of players. They have players in every kind of status. They have top players, mid-tier players. They have also low-tier players. And they are quite diversified with regard to age and position. We have 17 big agencies here. Then we have a kind of agencies. They are not so big. On average, they represent 5 players, but they have more top tier players. We have the same with mid-tier players, and they are 40 here. And finally, with low-tier players, they only represent low-tier players. But what is interesting is not that they represent low-tier players; it's that they are diversified on citizenship mostly. It's interesting. So it means that they have players coming from different confederations. So it's an interesting group, but they are also somewhat diversified in terms of position and age. Then we have a very small group of age specialists. they are very concentrated on age. So there is one concentrated on very young players, 18 to 22, and one concentrated only on 37 to I don't remember the max, but to more old players, let's say older players. Sorry. And finally, we have 2 very similar groups. The difference coming from the number of players they represent. Small portfolio confederations specialists, I call them. So they both are confederation specialists, but one has a small portfolio and then represent only low-tier players, while the other category represents a bit more mid-tier and even some of them top-tier players. And they most importantly have bigger portfolio. Finally, we have a small group of 8 with agencies representing players that play on the same position. So basically, if I remember well, it's 4 of them represent only midfielders, 2 of them represent only goalkeepers, and 1 of them represent only defender, and 1 only I remember forward. Sorry. So this is the 8 groups and their characteristic on the 7 variable we use to cluster, plus the number of the count of agencies in each group. So we found this clustering interesting because also the number of agencies in each group is not very different, contrary to the previous one. Here we have some groups. Yeah, of course, we have 2 very little groups of 2 and 8, but the rest is pretty homogeneous, so it's interesting. If we look at the U map this time with the coloring the 8 groups, yeah, as we have seen before, we see that the very high position HHI is a group on its own. But we also see that, for example, the group of big portfolio and small portfolio, as I call them, they are both very concentrated in terms of confederation. They are very close, and there are some agencies that are that are grouping, let's say. But finally, what we wanted to look at was the network. So I will dive into this. Sorry for now, it's a bit messy, but I'll try to go into this. So here we have the agency clubs network. The white circle are the clubs. And we see also that there are a lot of gray dots, nodes, that are agencies with only 1 or 2 players. They are, of course, on the outer rim of the network. What can we see here? Obviously, the top agencies here in pink, in ICM Stella, Wasserman, Unique Sports Group. I think we've heard of that a lot. And obviously, since they have been since the category have been constructed on the number of players they represent, they are very central in the network. We can see also that some clubs are not very well integrated in the network. It's the case for, let's say, small clubs. Cremonese, it's an Italian club. I think they reached the Serie A this year or last year or something like that. So, and it's the same for Ajaccio in France. So they are a bit on the outside of the network. So we are currently going into this, but I have split the network into smaller network for each of the group of agencies that we find in the clustering. So we are trying now to develop an analysis of these networks. What we see is that the big agency network is much more dense than the others, of course. Age specialist and position specialist, it's not very interesting because we have a few number of agencies. And what is interesting is to compare, for example, the big portfolio and small portfolio confederation specialists. We see directly here that the number of connection of each agent, so the blue and the orange nodes, they are very different because for big portfolios, it's much more dense because they all have on average 7 links, while for small portfolios, they have on average 3 links. So it looked like a kind of hierarchical tree or something like that, almost. And then we have the 3, let's say, low tier, mid tier, and top tier networks. It's not very meaningful for the moment, but we are looking at it. And what is interesting also when we look at that, it's not impactful on the visualization, sorry, but is the clubs that are not connected, but not reached by the agencies in each group. So for one club, we could say, for example, that he is connected to mid-tier, top-tier, small portfolio and big agencies, but he is not well connected to position specialists, for example. So big agencies, they are connected to all clubs in Big Five leagues, except Ajaccio in France. But only one club is not connected to big agencies, to none of big agencies. For other categories, we have 8 clubs that are not connected to big portfolios. I could have the list, but it's not very meaningful to spell it out. For small portfolio, 23 clubs are not connected. For low tier players, intermediaries, there are 29 agencies in this group, but still there are 34 clubs that are not connected to this group. And of course, the top clubs, Real Madrid, Barcelona, PSG, United, Atletico Madrid, Liverpool, and so on, they are not connected to this kind of agents. So, alternatively, we can see that top tier agencies that represent top tier players are not connected, obviously, to let's say smaller clubs. Like I have the list: Nantes, Clermont, Köln, Bergame, Lecce, and so on. So we are looking at it at the moment. So I do not have a lot to say for the moment, but we are still working on that. And obviously, we have work to do on the clustering too. So I don't want to go too deep into the network analysis yet, because maybe the clustering will change. And this leads me to my last slide, which as I said, have myself some questions. So you don't need to answer them. Maybe you will have some question and I will be glad to answer them. But if you need some leads to open the discussion, here are some questions that I had and that we had. And so we split the player status variable. We split it in 3 according to total valuation, but maybe some other split might be interesting. Do you have any references? I have not seen references saying that one split or another could be better. If we look at papers about star economics, I don't know exactly. So maybe you will have some ideas, the clustering techniques, maybe you will have some to suggest. We have a lot in mind and we have a lot to test, but we don't know exactly yet which one might be the most appropriate. And finally, are there some other variables that could be interesting to use to define the portfolio of agents? We concentrated on the size, diversification, and valuation, but maybe something different can be meaningful too. So this is the first result that we have. And once again, sorry, but it's still work in progress, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maxence. That was a really fascinating presentation with a lot of very impressive ways of representing some complex data. So thank you very much for that. And we've got lots of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask or comments to make, perhaps answering any of Maxence's questions on this slide, please do raise your hands and go ahead.
I'm sorry. How to? Yeah. Okay. I live. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we might want the slides back up, but you can reshare them.
Yeah.
At that point.
Obviously. it was that clear.
Well, I mean, we'll wait for any questions and comments, I guess. I mean, I'm fascinated by the kinds of ways in which you're representing the data, but I won't confess to have fully digested, exactly what each of them shows. So, questions and comments. Daniele has his hand up.
Yeah. So, really interesting data. One just very sort of clarifying way of treating the data question. So you're taking just the raw transfer market value, sometimes in logs, sometimes in levels. You're not doing any age adjustment or position adjustment. If my understanding is that the transfer market value is depends on certainly on age, and there's a inverse U-shaped curve that players in their 30s and beyond, they have sort of lower transfer market value, even though perhaps their contributions on the field are not lesser than those of their sort of younger colleagues. And I think it also depends on the duration of the contract, like how much time you have on the contract left, which is interesting thing. So and that's just a way of maybe like, okay, would the results look very different if you did this sort of age adjusted transfer value, and would you get sort of different patterns? But I think the other sort of broader question is, okay, so suppose that you can characterize these agents that sort of appear to specialize in different types of players, whether it's by position, whether it's by confederation. The natural question is, does this benefit the players that they represent? Do they have better career moves? Do they earn more money? I think, by the way, that there is now some data, part of it estimated on player wages that you can get. I don't know how far back it goes, but that's sort of one way of saying, hey, this agent is really good because he is able to get very good contract for his for the player that he represents. So I think that I would be really interested in seeing sort of the other than just sort of describing the network and the specialization, then use that as an input into sort of some other questions. So
yeah. Thank you. Yes, obviously we have a lot of ideas regarding agents. It's for us it's a preliminary step into a bigger project. Yes, definitely. We thought that this is a first step to look at data and propose something that is meaningful on its own, because we want to look at the network. But of course, it would be interesting to see if the agent impact the negotiation. So you talked about the salaries, for example, but also do they impact the matching? I don't know, do some agent have an impact on transfer fees paid or something like that? It would be very interesting. We are trying to get the transfer data for the summer transfer window to see if maybe we can have some impact of agent, or maybe by category. Or yes, this is something we are trying we will try to look at. It's a preliminary step. So I hope on its own it would be interesting, especially in terms of network. But then obviously we'll try to have other article or presentation in this project, because the data are very interesting. And coming back to your first question about adjusting transfer market values, yes, I've worked a bit on transfer market values too, and the age, the position, and so impact the transfer market values for the contract, the remaining contract time. It's not very clear yet, because they say it's not dependent on the contract time, but yes. So what if we adjust? I've not tested it, obviously, but I mean, we would expect an agent that is representing, I don't know, for example, only forward to have also more top players. So this is an idea, for example. In our setup, I have two answers for that. The first is that in clustering, it's not very a problem, because you would have a cluster of agents representing forward and highly valued players. So it's the purpose of clustering. It's gathering the individuals because they look alike. So for it's not the same as multicollinearity in regression analysis also. This is the first thing, and I lost the second one. Oh, sorry. The second thing I wanted to say. Sorry, I can't remember. But yes, definitely, it would be interesting to look at. But I think in the clustering, it's not a big deal. And to be honest, the reason why we didn't start with regression, for example, at first I wanted to regress the market share of agents and look at I don't know if they have ex-players from age 18 to 22 and so on, all these variables. But it was not very possible because there were too many missing data, because no, not missing data, but missing variables. For example, past links, or also past job of the agent. It's very impactful in terms of who you are representing and your market share. So it was very difficult for that. And also, and I go back to your question, because there was a lot of multicollinearity between the data, because we build the agent data on the player's data, and then we have a lot that are impacted by the number of players you represent, or transfer market values, and so on. So it was very difficult to do that. So we try to have another approach, and that's why clustering as a first step for to explain something else later, maybe. Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks, Daniele. Stefan.
Hi, Maxence. It's very interesting data, and when I look at this, it strikes me. I think of two possible explanations. So what we see is, as you showed, a concentration of a small number of agents with a large number of clients, and then a large number of agents with a small number of clients. And I can think of two explanations for that. So, and then probably more, but one explanation is obviously the agents match teams to players. The agents that are good at doing this generate more clients. The agents who are bad at this generate few clients, and so you end up with this distribution, the kind of log normal distribution. But there's another explanation I could think of, which is actually agents make zero difference at all. They achieve completely nothing. But nonetheless, each agent has a random probability of getting another client every period. And if every agent has a random probability, and the probability is the same for every single agent, what will happen is some agents will randomly have sequences, and what you'll get is a concentration of a small number of agents who get very big, and then you'll have a long tail who stay small. So both of these processes are consistent with the data. Do you think there's any way with what you've got that you could discriminate between those two hypotheses?
Yeah, I think I got the second one, but the first one, I must admit, can you, rephrase or, sorry.
So there's, you want to match players with teams. So a skilled agent will be able to find an ideal match. So for every player, there's a range of, there's 1,000 possible matches of teams, and there's one that's the best. And so the successful agents are the ones that have the highest probability of finding your best match. So this is a sort of an assortative matching story. And the worst agents are the ones who aren't very good at that. They find you your 10th or your 20th best match. And so therefore, the ones who successfully match grow big and have lots of clients. The ones that don't produce very good matches, well, they don't grow. So that's a sort of so it's a skill. So there's a skill and there's a reward in the marketplace to the skill.
Okay. Yes, I understand. So is it due to the skill or is it random? Kind of. Kind of. Okay. Yeah. How to discriminate? That's a good question. Good idea, by the way. Well, the thing is that the most difficult thing that we have with agent data, it's that it is difficult to get first. And what is even more difficult to get is historical data. So if I had this kind of data for 2 or 3 years, I think maybe evaluate the randomness or assess the randomness of the growth of an agency could be feasible. But in this case, it's very difficult with static data for me now. I will have I have to think about it. Yes, one thing too, which is important in the why some agencies are so big, is that some agencies buy other agencies. So as soon as some of them get 3, 4, 5 players, interesting players, they can be bought by another one, and so it grows. And also some, I'd say mid-size, but it's already big, like 10, 15, 20 players represented. Sometimes they I don't know what to say, they gather and to compete with Wasserman, ICM, and so on. So yeah, so this is a third explanation, maybe. I will have I will have to think about your idea. Is it skill or randomness? But I think this randomness, being able to have new players in each time period, it explains why there are so many agents and that it's not very concentrated, because finally it's a market where we have 700 actors, so it's quite decent. I was expecting more concentration, to be honest, and finally you have a lot of players or agents that represent one player. So it's very tailed, as you said, but it's because next year you will have 200 new players coming into football or Big Five. So maybe in that it will be 150 or I don't know, new agents. So it creates it renew the pool of agents. So definitely having some timed data will be interesting. So, but for now, I don't know how to assess that. I will think about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Any more questions and comments? I guess one thing that springs to mind, Maxence, is that I understand there's been some FIFA regulations passed recently to limit agents' fees and I guess try and impose some, I don't know whether order is the right word, but do something with the agents market that you're studying. Do you feel that your research will be able to contribute in any way to kind of the policy debates that are going, or do you feel this policy will have an effect on the agents market?
The first issue for me is that, as I said at the beginning, is that we want one agent in the new regulation is a physical person. So I guess maybe tomorrow I will not have a data set with agencies, but a data set with agents. So it's kind of difficult for me because I talked about having timed data, and then they changed the regulation as soon as I have my first data set. So it's a bit annoying, but still, I'm looking forward to the new regulation to come into force. As I said, it has started, but it will be kind of mandatory in October 2023. I look forward to it because I hope we can see some changes, or I have a data set just before the change. So hopefully I will be able to see the impact or something like that. Yeah, definitely. Regarding the pricing, it's a big question in two-sided markets. Which side should pay? Is it you that should pay Facebook, or is it the advertisers, for example? It's a big question. I think there are some answers in the literature about two-sided markets regarding what would be the optimal fee for an agent. And it would be interesting to see if this optimal fee would match what FIFA decided. It's I think they decided it's 6% until 200,000, and then 3%. I think it's something like that. So agents are not very happy with that. But yeah. So and it's a big question for a long. It has been a big question for a long time. Who should pay the agent? Is it the club or is it the player? Thinking about it as a two-sided market might help, because there are some answers for who should pay, how much, and so on in the literature. So yeah, I would. There is a lot to do. Some theoretical and some more empirical, but yeah, definitely it's something I will have to look at once the regulation come into force.
Is there a sense, I mean, obviously agents are normally thought of as being players' agents, but obviously they have to deal with clubs. I mean, is there a sense in which football agents are a bit like estate agents or real estate agents, you know, where they represent both sides of the market, and you might not be totally sure, you know, as a player, whether you're really getting the best value because maybe this agent's captured by the club and is more arguing for the club, that kind of idea.
Yes, definitely, because I think it depends on the league, but some leagues allow clubs to have representatives. They cannot represent both in the same transaction, but they can still represent both of them at the time, not at the transaction time, but just before and just after, maybe. So it's a bit tricky. And definitely it's an issue, because maybe it would be interesting to have some kind of specialization of agents on clubs or on players, and they would not be able to. I would like to see that, you know, having some agent that can only represent clubs and some that can only represent players, and you would avoid some kind of mismatching or inefficient matching. I think we have some issues about inefficient matching here in the football market, and it would be interesting to test. Yeah, but this is why I want to look at transfers. Maybe if we can prove that some of them or a category of them can change the fee or can change the probability of being moved, or I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks, Maxence. Any other final questions and comments from folk? Maybe not. In which case, Maxence, we can say thank you very, very much. That was a really interesting presentation, novel data set, a really interesting market to be looking at and studying. So thank you very much for that, and we look forward to seeing how your research develops. We're going to return again next week for one more talk before the Easter break, and that will be next Friday. Daniel Passaman will be presenting loss aversion in teams, evidence from two-legged ties in European soccer. So have a great weekend, everyone, and see you all again next week.
Thank you.